Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And Bill from Punish Props Academy and Tested.
And we are back in our shop today for an episode of Model Behavior where we'll be talking about one of the most essential pieces of equipment you have in your workshop, paintbrushes.
Yeah, we have a whole assortment here. Some of them more specific purposes and some of them more general purposes.
And a lot of people have asked us over the years, what brushes should they use? We have the same question as well. What brushes to use for what types of projects? And what purposes can overlap, and when to spend money on a brush versus just buying a cheap brush.
Yeah.
So you've pulled these brushes from your collection and brought them in, and we'd love to just go down the line, first describe what these brushes are, and then give a sampling of what they can do on an object.
Absolutely. Why don't we start with some of the most basic and general purpose brushes. These are called acid brushes, and you can get them at pretty much any hardware store. They're used usually for solvents and glue. This is not usually used for painting paint. It's more for utility. You could use this for paint. If
We have totally used this for paint.
It might be the cheapest and therefore best option that you have, but it also might provide the best effect that you want because it's very stiff, rough bristles.
Yeah, very coarse bristles, very disposable brushes.
Yeah.
And
we buy them like 200 or 300 at a time. I use them for like barge contact cement. I will sometimes trim the end to get a shape that I want, and then when I'm done with it, it gets thrown out. One thing that can be a problem with these type of cheaper brushes is that these bristles will pull out. They're just clamped in there. There's no glue or anything. So usually if I'm using these for something where I want to not have the bristles end up in the product or the project I'm working on, I'll use super glue and I'll just glue the base of the bristles down.
so smart.
So just a little bit of super glue around that, both sides so that it soaks through. I also have my spray accelerant that everyone loves. Spritz the end of it there. Like that.
You've made that a more valuable brush.
It is a better brush now, and the bristles hopefully won't fall out as well. I can go use it to spread on my glue or contact cement and not lose bristles into the piece. Like that, we're good.
Yeah. Let's get a quick demo and put this on an object. We have a skull here from one of our old projects that we did with Frank, and I thought it'd be fun just to throw some paint on that. Would you use an acid brush like this for a wash, for example?
That might work. If I was going to use this for something, it'd probably be weathering, maybe even dry brushing.
Oh, okay.
I'll get into that more into the next one, but let's put a little paint on our buddy. We got some Code Blue paint. These are just acrylics. Put a little out there, and we'll just add a little paint here. So it's got kind of like a scratchy finish. This doesn't hold paint very well. But if that like mottled look is what you're going for, this might be a good option. So there we go. That's an acid brush, not great for painting, unless that's exactly what you're looking for.
Moving on.
Chip brushes. These are also pretty cheap. We also buy them by the 100. Use them for a lot of similar brushes or applications as the acid brush, but bigger, much bigger. A lot of times we use this for weathering. If you have a big prop or costume, you got to put a lot of like acrylic paint down and washes. This stuff is awesome. It's fairly stiff, so you can stipple pretty well with it. You get a ton of coverage.
Yeah, I use this when we did our TIE Fighter project, just to throw oil on that big surface area and just really push into the nooks and crannies with a wide brush like this.
For actually painting stuff, again, similar to the acid brush, it doesn't hold a ton of paint really well, but if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to dry brush an edge, it's pretty great because it's scratchy. It's got coarse bristles, and it leaves like scratch marks. So that's generally what I would use an acid brush for, or a chip brush for if I'm painting with it. You can use these kind of like the mop brush, which we'll get to cover a large area, but it will leave brush strokes because again, these are pretty stiff bristles. But again, if that's the look you're going for, then this will work just fine. Time for a mop brush. So this is a little crusty because we just used it on another project. But this, if you need to cover a large area and you want it to be a nice even finish, like not a lot of brush strokes, a mop brush is awesome for that.
And just to show you, feels soft.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, this is the first brush we're talking about where it's almost like a makeup powder brush.
Yeah. This holds a lot of paint. So again, if you're going to cover like bits of armor, like a pauldron, grab one of these guys and just load it with paint. Like that's all the paint you just dribbled down there is now in this brush. You can see just how loaded that is with paint. And that is used to cover very large areas as evenly as possible. And it's kind of a scrubbing motion, right? I'm not brushing like this. See, there's streaks in there. I'm scrubbing it, and it gets it down into all the crevices and details. You could also water this down, the acrylics. You can water those down a little bit if you want more of a wash for your color. But you could, if you want to add texture on the previous project we were using this for, I used it to add a little bit of kind of random texture if you want. But for the most part, like this is a lot of paint on there. I would love to spread it out more, but I don't want to cover this whole skull. But yeah, it's just used to get a lot of coverage and fill in a lot of spots. It is kind of like applying makeup, isn't it?
Yeah. From a big poofy one to a very flat one.
Yeah, and this is literally called a flat brush. I have a couple different sizes here. This is for like more precise covering of paint. Still very general purpose sort of brush. But if you want to be precise about, let's say, like you're painting a space rifle, a sci-fi gun or something, you have more control over where the paint goes.
Lets you paint within the lines too.
Yeah, if you have hard edges you want to follow. You will notice that it will leave brush strokes in the direction that you're painting it, so that's something to be aware of. Usually what I'll do is I'll paint like one layer like this, and then I'll go over it another layer in the opposite. Once this is dried for a little bit, I'll go in the opposite direction and kind of try and even out the texture a little bit if I'm worried about the brush strokes. But if you're good about it, you can lay it down without a lot of brush strokes. But
both of these are for coverage.
Yeah, you're just trying to put down a flat bit of color. I wouldn't use this for weathering per se. I would go back to my chip brush to just kind of mash everything. I also don't want to mash this brush because I'll wreck the bristles. But yeah, that's just a flat brush. A really good general purpose paintbrush to have for most applications. Took off the protective coating. It's a brand new brush.
This one looks like a flat brush.
Yes.
But it has an angle.
It's got a chisel tip on it, an angular tip on it. You can do a lot of the same stuff you would do with a flat brush, but I really dig these because you have that angled tip. You have a pointy bit so you can go in and do some more fine stuff with it. So if I'm trying to follow this, this crevice here, I actually have that kind of control, and then I can come in and paint that. So a lot of times when I'm painting, you know, like a Destiny rifle or something, I'll use a brush like this because I have that, like this corner right here would be kind of tricky to get at with a flat brush. So I'll come in with just the point of it and I have a little bit more control.
Now, is this the equivalent of taking a flat brush and cutting it to an angle, or
Yeah.
does it taper off at the top where you really want it to buy a specific angular brush?
I'm not sure if you can get ones with specific angles. They all seem pretty generically just called angular brushes. But yeah, you could just modify your flat brush. And you can paint with this like you were doing like a flat brush. You could totally just come in and do kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different of like how you would hold it,
Right?
Because you got to hold it at an angle.
A matter of ergonomics.
Yeah, if I had to buy one or the other, I would probably get the angular one because it's got a little bit more utility with that, being able to come in with the edge. You can also you could come in and draw like a thin line, a fairly thin line like that. And as the paintbrush finishes, those bristles let go and you just have the tip at the end there. But yeah, I really dig how you can come in and get that fine detail with just the tip of that brush. Time for a new brush. This is a Filbert brush.
That's not very descriptive at all.
No, the rest of them have like normal names, but this one's Filbert. It's got a rounded tip on it. This one's kind of beat up. You'll notice that a lot of my brushes are kind of beat up. But the way it's cut on the end gives you some control over the gradient. A lot of times if I'm painting and I need there to be a gradient, I use my airbrush because it's wicked easy. Just it's got the nice fall off. But to accomplish the same thing with a paintbrush would be really tricky to do with a flat brush. But the Filbert brush, you can, as the paintbrush leaves, you have, like as you pull it off, less of the bristles make contact. So you can actually, same thing with where you start. Like if I start up here, less of the bristles make contact as I leave the surface. So I actually have some degree of control over the gradient on the edge. So like this part right here, it kind of fades off a bit. It gets really cool when you start mixing colors together. So if you laid down like a base coat and then kind of blended this into it, you would have a nice fall off, nice gradient like that. This isn't the type of painting I usually do. Like I said, I would normally go for my airbrush, but a lot of people are painting their costumes and their space guns and stuff in an apartment, and they don't have, you know, a setup for an airbrush. So this is a really great alternative.
And that's when you're applying it many strokes.
Yeah, that's kind of just my take on painting, on hand painting, is I just keep, as Frank would say, sneaking up on it. But I really do like how you can keep kind of pulling the paint off like that, and you get that nice fall off there. Really great for like organic stuff. You could do like scorch marks, like on a blaster or something with some dark paints to make it look like it's faded a bit. So that's a Filbert brush. The next brush, we have round brushes, and these are specifically different from these other brushes. If you look at the metal part here, that's a cylinder, whereas with the flat brushes and the angle brushes, it's been squished. So that's the main difference sort of mechanically between these brushes, but as far as how they're used, these tend to be more for like detail type stuff. So if I saturate this particular one with a lot of paint, it can be down to a point. You get really nice ones too that are round pointed ones, and you can do almost like writing. So I could just write Norm's face or Norm's name on here. This is totally like if you had to do text. I forgot how to spell Norm. No, I'm gonna write the word 9 because that's when I started painting. But you see you have a really good amount of control and a fairly thin point there. So this isn't for covering a whole piece. This is for doing fine detail work. Now, some of these other round brushes, this one here, this isn't exactly a stippling brush, but if you go to like Joann's and look in the stenciling area, they have brushes that are round and the end is perfectly flat, and they're stiff bristles. These are pretty stiff. And that is used for if you have a stencil. So you have a stencil laid down, you push down on the stencil, because if you drag across it, you'll force paint under the stencil. But stippling brushes are also really awesome for getting really good even coverage of paint. So if you have to cover an area and you don't want to see any brush strokes, this is a really good way to do it like that. But especially if you're doing stencil work. And again, if I have a stencil, usually I will airbrush it so you have a nice even color. Not always the case. One of these or a set of these is really awesome to have. But see how there are no brush strokes? There's like a texture to it, but there aren't any brush strokes on it. So you might do a couple layers like that on a stencil and then peel it off. But those are the round brushes.
Oh my God, look at this. It's grip too.
Yeah, this,
wow.
You know when there's a custom handle that brush means business. If you look up model making brushes, you'll find sets of these, and they have generally just like different sizes, and they go down to even smaller than this.
Whoa.
I have a smaller one.
How many bristles?
I couldn't find it. I don't know where it is. But this is for doing really fine detail work on models. So let me show you, I'll compare it. This is actually a round brush. You can see that this collet is round. Grab some of my blue paint here. And you just have like the tiniest amount of paint on there. And then if you wanted to do text, you totally could. But a lot of times these are used on things like models, like small scale models, or figures, to paint things like the eyes. Like if you wanted to get a tiny dot of paint, boop, for like the pupil on a like 1/18 scale model. Try doing that with this, you're gonna have a hard time. But these little guys with their comfort grip are so cool.
And it still allows you to push into a crevice, a corner, to get good coverage in a place at that scale.
Only good coverage, but really small. In fact, we have a little dude there.
We do.
We have a little head that we can show. So I'm gonna try and make his eyes blue. We're gonna make the whole eye blue. And I got some on his eyelid because I'm not very good at this, but that's it. Just applying a tiny bit of paint on his eye there. Oh, it's so easy to overdo it. But yeah, if you're gonna do any tiny model making paint like this, you have to get some brushes like this. Like an airbrush wouldn't work, it'd just be too much paint, and any of these other brushes wouldn't work. If you have to, you could buy a cheaper round brush like this and cut most of the bristles off. These aren't exactly expensive, but they're not crazy cheap either. So yeah, you can get away without it, but I highly recommend this for that kind of work.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. A selection of brushes.
Yes.
There's so many more, like...
Absolutely.
In the world of brushes, but if you have a good selection like this, you can do most of prop making, miniature building, and finishing.
In fact, if you go to like a craft store and they have the $5 bag of just assorted brushes, get it. Even if you don't like those brushes, you can use them for weathering. You can use them as disposable brushes later. But more importantly, use them all. Understand the effect you get from each one of them, and then if you have some favorites, go out and get some nicer brushes. These are fairly nice. Does it say the price on here? No, but I want to say this was like $5. Oh. So even you can get good brushes for not a ton of money. I just recommend finding the ones you like and just getting good versions of those. You don't have to get good versions of all of them.
And you can never have enough of the cheap chip brushes and acid brushes.
The tube that protects the end of it, usually I throw it away, but for this little guy, once I wash this, which will be as soon as we stop recording, I'm gonna run and clean it, this tube goes back on there so that I don't bend the end of that. Yeah. There's only a few bristles in there, they're not very stiff, so if this gets jammed against something and that gets bent, it's gonna be impossible to fix. So keep these tubes for that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Bill.
You got it.
Going through just a selection of brushes. Hope this was useful for you out there. We'll be using brushes like this in other model making projects on model behavior in the future. But until then, thanks for watching. Go subscribe also. Follow Bill's channel, Punish Props Academy. Lots of good stuff there. Thank you guys for supporting us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.